Anthony "Rumble" Johnson was one of the most prolific knockout artists the world of MMA had ever seen, striking fear into the hearts of the UFC roster from 2007 through 2017. In absolutely heartbreaking news, Johnson lost his battle against non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a potentially deadly immune disorder. Let's take a closer look at what happened to Rumble and some of his best performances. First and foremost, what happened to Johnson? Anthony's health had been deteriorating for a while now. He'd told his fans about it on social media before, but never really expressed discomfort or pain. His manager, Ali Abdelaziz, gave a clearer picture of how serious the situation was when he asked for prayers in a press conference, telling them that the former #1 contender wasn't doing well. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a cancer variant with a somewhat favorable prognosis. Over 70% of victims survive. However, those statistics are heavily influenced by age, and you're more likely to succumb to the illness as you get older. Much like the actor Chadwick Boseman, Rumble never indicated having cancer. His friends reported that he would be out with them, telling stories like normal after having dialysis on his failing kidneys the same day. Johnson didn't even let his health affect his performances in the cage. He knocked out Jose Augusto Azevedo at Bellator 258 as recently as 2021. Former training partner Kamaru Usman was one of the few people Rumble confided in, and Usman believes Rumble just didn't want people to see him suffering from his illness, losing so much weight and looking frail. After a lifetime in the spotlight, Rumble wanted privacy near the end. With his passing, the MMA fraternity has lost one of the most explosive fighters and an equally kind human being outside the cage. Let's take a look at how the MMA world is feeling about this loss. Rumble was a household name in the MMA during a time when it was finding its feet as a professional sport and went on to highlight some of the best cards the UFC has ever put on. At 23-6-0, Rumble's losses came at the highest level, but his 85% knockout rate brought a ton of new fans to the sport who wanted to see the beast who held dynamite in both hands. Few come close to Anthony's power, skill, and character more than former two-division world champion Daniel Cormier. Rumble had 2 opportunities to capture UFC gold and was choked out by a prime DC both times. But you develop a bond with someone when you share so much time in the cage with someone. DC was among the first to post about Rumble, paying tribute to his terrifying aura as a fighter and his tenderness as a friend. Big John McCarthy, a UFC official and one of the godfathers of professional mixed martial arts, had a front row seat to Rumble's storm through the welterweight and light heavyweight divisions and built a connection to the man over the years. He was mournful at the loss of such a great man with a huge heart. Sentiment fighters like Gilbert Burns, Charles Oliveira, Michael Chiesa, and John Jones have all echoed. We didn't think it was possible, but Rumble moved more men with his heart than he did with his right hand. Still, let's honor AJ like a warrior and look at some of his most devastating knockout performances in mixed martial arts. Anthony Johnson's 5 most brutal knockouts in the UFC, starting off with when he sent Yoshida flying. This one is unfair because it came during the series of weight misses during Rumble's opening stint in the UFC's welterweight division. AJ was too big for 170, only managing 176 against Yoshiyuki Yoshida when he weighed in, but on fight night, after Rumble was rehydrated, it was clear how big of a weight mismatch it was. Yoshida was already on the smaller side of 170, not cutting much weight himself. It's advantageous if you can get someone like Rumble to the later rounds, hoping to gas him out, but first, you have to survive. Yoshida was stunned when a punch from an initial flurry grazed his temple, and Rumble sent the smaller man flying with a hook as he gathered his wits. The impact was so significant that the generally lenient State Mazzagatti stepped in immediately to rescue Yoshiyuki. The fight incited some criticism towards the matchmakers for allowing the bout to continue, and rightfully so, since such matchups can be dangerous. After a few more weight misses, AJ's team realized he shouldn't deplete himself so much and be unreliable on the scale. His power would also translate to heavier weight classes, and they were right. Moving on, AJ's head kick vengeance against Kevin Burns. Rumble lost 6 times in the octagon, and while DC and Josh Koscheck took him down and beat him up in dominating performances, Kevin Burns pulled one over Rumble via eye poke. The two met in the welterweight division in 2008 when Rumble was the victim of a deep eye poke that had him screaming in pain on the ground. The referee mistook it for a landed punch, stepping in to stop the fight, and the California State Athletic Commission didn't see any choice but to let the decision stand despite AJ's protests. Instead, he got the opportunity to avenge the loss 5 months later. Anthony took the opportunity to remind the world that he doesn't just have power in his hands. Once more, the fight went deep into the 3rd round, even though Rumble was putting a beatdown on Burns. Probably thinking he needed to finish to win the fight, Kevin pushed forward but leaned into a head kick that shut his lights out before hitting the canvas. We didn't need an athletic commission to tell us whether the decision stands this time. Next up, an upset for the history books against Alexander Gustafsson. Rumble eventually found his way to the UFC's 205-pound division after 2 years in the regional circuit, knocking out both of his first opponents to establish himself as a serious contender for the belt. They went out the window alongside Gustafsson's consciousness, if anyone had any doubts. Gus was one of the guys to beat in that division if you wanted to challenge John Jones, and AJ met the mauler in his hometown of Stockholm in Sweden. The crowd couldn't comprehend what happened when Alex went down to the mat through a well-placed right by Rumble, but the reality of the situation began to sink in as AJ swarmed Gus on the ground and beat him until the referee had to step in for Alexander's sake. This win proved quite a few things about Johnson that pushed his career to the next level. Firstly, the power was still there at 205. Secondly, he could consistently make weight and be relied upon for high-profile fight cards. And lastly, he proved he could handle the big stage by putting on that performance against a hostile crowd in a different country. Now for Rumble's statement against Ryan Bader. AJ failed to realize his championship aspirations against Daniel Cormier in 2015, but that didn't dampen the fire inside him to climb up the ladder and try again. The first step was knocking out Jimmy Manuwa, but critics didn't think he could overcome the challenge Ryan Bader presented on the ground after seeing what Cormier did to Anthony. Bader came into the fight on a 5-fight win streak, and Dana White made it clear that this was for a #1 contender spot. That was motivation enough for Rumble, who wanted to showcase his skills on the ground and make a case for challenging wrestling phenom DC again. Bader shot for a takedown, but Rumble mounted him to drop some of the heaviest bombs anyone's ever dropped on a fighter in the UFC. After a couple of clean shots landed, Bader was out cold, and Johnson thought he had made his case. However, the UFC felt they needed to see more of that vicious ground game before giving AJ another go at the champion. It happens that he's also our pick for Rumble's most vicious knockout ever. Finally, the historic flatlining of Glover Teixeira. If his performance was an indication, Rumble was super frustrated over DC's schedule, forced him to wait for a rematch, and poor Glover became a venting opportunity for an angry Johnson. This 13-second knockout was particularly impressive because Teixeira was a notorious power puncher in his own right, riding a 3-fight win streak and sporting major Brazilian jiu-jitsu props. When two big hitters face off, it doesn't matter who hits harder because both can hit hard enough to get the job done. What matters is who can take the harder shot and who's more evasively proficient. Glover landed first, but it barely seemed to bother Johnson as he brought up an uppercut from the depths of hell right into Glover's jaw. The Brazilian dropped like a sack of potatoes, unconscious, before Rumble swung his fists back. It all happened so fast that the referee couldn't get in between the two fighters before AJ landed 2 more hammer fists onto Glover that were far from needed. Who could the UFC put up against this man who wouldn't be sent to the hospital afterward? The only path for Rumble after this was another title shot. That's a wrap for this video. Drop your messages and prayers for AJ in the comments below and let us know which of his knockouts is your favorite. If you enjoyed this video, hit the thumb up button and subscribe for more. For more MMA content, don't forget to subscribe.